Excuse me. Hello? Pete? I was just trying to get folks' attention, sorry. All right, it is 12:16, so it is time to start the working group chairs. You want to go back to the top just to do the, oh yeah, okay, that one you don't need. The next one, no, well, this is still IETF, so we do need to pay attention to that. The next one is the agenda for today. We might be doing a tiny bit of shuffling. Oh, nope, we're not going to shuffle the agenda. So this is the agenda that we have for today. The most important part is the session on the consensus. So that is where we will go. We do have a jabber room. Sometimes it's a little bit confusing whether we do or not, but we do actually have a jabber room as WG chairs. And with that, we will move. Is there any agenda bashing? Nope. Okay, excellent. So the first thing I'd like to do is to have Jay introduce himself. Come on up. So you get the pink X.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Jay Daly. I'm the new IETF Executive Director. I've been in the job about 4 weeks now, so apologies if I don't know all of your names yet. I'll be making that same apology in about 2 years' time, I'm sure. But if there's any of you that I can continue to say hello to, please just wave and I'll come and meet. As you know, I work for the IETF LLC, which is a reasonably new construct, and my role is new as well. So I'm still working out exactly what I'm meant to do. If any of you can help me on that, then I'd very much appreciate it. Plenty of people are willing to tell me what I can't do, but things that I can do, I'd love to hear about. So I'm here, I think, as certainly to manage certain aspects such as contracts and fundraising and other things, and I've just sent out an announcement now about another contract we've signed, but there are plenty of other broader things I think we'll be looking at as well. So if you want to find me, then you have my email addresses. Please let me know. I live in possibly the furthest country in the world for many of the rest of you, in New Zealand. So if you're on your way to Antarctica, you can always stop in and say hello, but it's generally friendly time hours for many people. So I'm here, I'm available. Please get in touch if you'd like to speak about anything. Any questions or anything now? Otherwise, I'm done. No? Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Jay. All right, so next up on the agenda is Pete. I have also been informed that the jabber room that's pointed to from Data Tracker is actually the Edu jabber room, but there is a WG chairs one, so I would use that one if you don't mind. Being a team instead of a working group always means that the data tracker's a little bit odd.
I'll push the wrong button eventually. Hi all. So this is a work in progress. I hope we can do this more than once and add to it, and that the conversation helps with this. So up front, these are my opinions, not IETF dictum, as if we ever have anything like that. But RFC 7282 is a consensus document, albeit informational and not BCP. And a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about has been quite effective chairing and useful. So I hope it's useful to you as well. Wow, doing this with bifocals is really interesting. Also note that this is part of sort of a bigger picture project on helping chairs do their jobs. So most of us are engineers, not managers by trade. Managing volunteers isn't even like managing folks in corporate settings, so it's even more complicated than that. And I know that Alyssa has been looking for different ways to get chairs training on dealing with working groups, and so we should be seeing more of that going forward. This is just a piece. So let's talk about consensus just at the top level. By the way, just so we get nice arm exercise in, who has read and feels like they get a general picture from 7282? Oh, good. That's nice to see. Okay. So remember, consensus is a means to an end. We don't do consensus just because it's fun to hum. What we're doing here is technical work, and it is in fact the case that some choices are worse than others. So we want to make sure that we hear all voices in the room or all voices on the mailing list, because it might be the case that one person has the right answer and we all go, oh man, of course that's the right answer. And just doing a vote isn't a helpful way to find that out. We also want to minimize some of the bad things that can happen in standards organizations by way of politicking. So packing votes with people who don't know what's going on, making bad compromises, all of those things. And 7282 talks a bit about all of those bad outcomes and why doing consensus helps avoid those things. Rough consensus, doing rough consensus instead of full consensus, is so that we can deal with the fact of actual engineering compromises. Full consensus can go on forever. You should ask John Levine for interesting stories. I believe his partner is a member of the Friends Society, and how they can go on for years and years with single decisions. It's loads of fun. For engineering, we need things to complete in finite time. That would be good. Engineering is never going to be a perfect choice. We do need to make compromises. We do need to balance risks and rewards with certain engineering choices. And so sometimes a desire of one person is going to be superseded by, we got to get this done and we got to make a choice. Finally, we eventually do need to say, yeah, we get it, but we're going to take that risk and go in a different direction. And rough consensus allows us to do that. So that all out of the way. One of the things that I've been pushing is that doing rough consensus means that chairs need to take responsibility. Chairs, ADs, whoever is in leadership, you have a real serious responsibility that you've got to take up in that position. As a chair, you've got to be able to decide that somebody's in the rough. You've got to make the call that, yeah, I've heard it, I've heard the room, and yeah, we get that you object, but you're in the rough part of that consensus. You need to be able to notice when people are just coming in the room to pack the vote and aren't bringing anything additional to the table. That whole section at the end of 7282 about 5 people for and 100 people against could be consensus, or could be rough consensus, exceedingly controversial, and it's absolutely the most absurd example of what could happen, but it's theoretically one of the things we're trying to avoid. Is packing the room with a bunch of people just to say no doesn't mean no. And it's a good tool to make sure that we're making a good engineering choice. So you've got to be able to identify that and got to be able to push back on that. And if it really was 5 for and 100 against, I doubt any of us in this room could actually pull off the task of saying, nope, the 5 people get it, but you should be aware that that's a tool that's available. You've got to be able to, for purposes of discussion, put your own opinion aside. You've got to be to the room, to your working group, a neutral arbiter. That doesn't mean that anybody expects you to be tabula rasa. I was just talking to someone earlier today that we do this thing of with my hat on, with my hat off. And with my hat off doesn't mean I'm not taking that into account. It can't. You are that person. What it means is I'm admitting that I've got this bias, but I'm going to try my best not to engage in it. Okay? You're not saying that you have removed your brain. You're just saying that I'm going to try and do my best to be neutral. And that includes, and this is incredibly hard some of the time, your ability to say, I am in the rough. Yes, I disagree with you. Yes, I think this is the stupidest choice you could possibly make, but the room is going against me. I'm on the rough end of this consensus. And you need, as a chair, to be able to do that. The flip side of that coin is you need to be able to use good technical judgment. And this sounds contradictory, but you need to be able to hear what the room is saying and say, wait a minute, you know, Mary has this claim that this protocol is going to fall apart and disaster is going to occur if we go ahead in this method. And you know what? That sounds right. I can't figure out how you people who are saying, no, no, it's going to be fine, are correct, because I'm using my technical judgment to say that is a real problem. So you've got to have the ability, and this is why we put engineers in these roles, you've got to have the ability to evaluate the technical claims and make that judgment. Balancing that with putting your own opinion aside is hard, but you have to do that. This one, you've got to be willing to take the heat, even if important people say that you're wrong. You've got to be able to stand up there, even if the person who is an AD speaking in their capacity as just a participant says, no, no, you're out of your mind. And if you hear that the consensus is against that person, or that person's just not making any sense, you got to be able to say, sorry, you're in the rough. That's sometimes hard. One sub-point of that is, there is, I know this is painful, nothing wrong with getting appealed. Part of the reason we have this structure of, you know, we've got chairs and they report to ADs and the ADs listen to the whole IASG and then the IAB, is because you're supposed to use your technical judgment, make the call, but we have these backup plans if you screw it up. Be confident in making those technical calls and then let the backup plan kick in if it doesn't. That backup plan starts with someone comes up to you and says, I think you screwed up. Let's talk this through offline. And if they can't convince you, tell them it's cool if you go to the AD, convince the AD that I've screwed up and let them come back and explain to me that I've screwed up. That should be an okay thing to have happen. The other piece of chairing, and this is where I kind of, not ironically, want to interact and start the discussion, is that I think an important part of chairing is following the discussion on the list in the room and doing both on the list and in the room active listening. What do I mean by that? I don't mean it in the, kind of psychology, social worker way of active listening. The whole purpose of having these discussions is to move the discussion to a conclusion, right? We want to come up with, this is what's going in the document. This is what we're going to do. As the discussion moves along, you as chair are the person who's calling the consensus. You're the one who is saying, here's what we've decided. You need to say out loud, whether on the list or in the room, what you're thinking. Saying things like, it sounds to me like the only objection is such and so, and that sounds answered, so we're moving along, is really important, because if you make that statement and you've gotten it wrong, someone will then have the opportunity to come up and say, whoa, no, 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 that's not the only objection. I believe X is in the rough will make, hopefully, the people who support X come up to the mic and say, it's not just X, and here's the reason why that point is very important. So you want to drive discussion, make sure people are engaging. If you don't know where you are, if you don't say, here's what's going on, people will continue to get up to the microphone and say thing after thing after thing. And I know that we love, I say this later on, shouting into the void. People like to get up to the microphone and say their thing and not be responsive to either the last person who spoke or the point that's going on in the room. What you want to drive people toward is, okay, I heard Joe say this thing. Does anybody have anything that disagrees with Joe, or are you just standing at the mic to repeat the same thing? Get the people who are saying something different up there. Let there be an interaction, not just, I'm going to say this important thing that's been said 20 times already. If you're not sure what someone is saying, if you're not sure what the import is, ask the question. Ask, wait a minute, okay, so you went through all that, but what do you think of the, do you want this thing in the protocol or don't you? Ask the question, make sure that you're getting people to state what their position is. And you'll get to the outcome quicker that way. If you haven't heard a response to a point yet, put that to the room. I haven't heard anybody reply to this. Make people engage in the discussion, not just stand in the queue to say their thing and you're at a loss for where you're at. Your purpose as chair is not just to listen to everybody speak, it's to understand what decision the room is making and say that out loud so that there is a decision on the floor. Finally, don't ask questions that you already know the answer to. What that tends to do is move discussion away from conclusion, because people will get up and try and reinforce or try to speak against. If you know that there are only two people in the room who are going on about this one particular point and everybody else really is convinced that no, they don't have a point, you know that, there's no need to continue saying, okay, so which way are we going to go? Whoops. Yeah, so this brings us to the humming issue. What we're trying to do with the hum is avoid having it come to a vote, right? We're trying to get a sense of the room without it being a vote and the majority wins. And the reason we want that is because if one person's got the showstopper or the obvious solution, we want them to be heard independent of whether they're in the majority. Some hums that we do are just anonymous votes, right? We're just doing a, how loud is the hum? Okay, the quieter one loses, the louder one wins. There's no point in that. Again, going back to, if you already know the answer, why are you asking the question? If you need a multi-option hum, okay, so choice 1 is this, choice 2 is this, choice 3, and by the way, if you want this one but not this one, only hum for, you're doing it wrong, right? So what happens if you get a few quiet hums for choice number 2 and choice number 63? What does that mean? What is the meaning of quiet hums? Quiet hums could mean that the two people are going, I've been trying to tell you that this is just screwball and you know the whole thing is going to collapse, but you're not hearing it, are just humming quietly because they're done. You want to make sure the points come out, not just the hum. And I've got a big issue with the feel-good hums, right? Get everybody to hum together on this one important thing. The problem with them is that it trains people that if you can get everybody in the room humming in the same direction, that we can bully out of order the people who are humming quietly. And so what you want to do is get people in the discussion, not just humming for the sake of humming. Brian
Rosen. I'm going to push back a little bit on that. We have a problem in the IETF that we have people with technical knowledge and with opinions we want to hear who are afraid to talk. They don't come up to the mic. What a hum does sometimes is get those people to at least acknowledge that they don't agree with what has been said. If you don't hold it, you don't know that's going on.
I tend to agree with you there. And I've seen a different technique used to accomplish that. And you can do it with a hum as well, which is ask the contrapositive, right? Instead of saying who wants A, who wants not A, start with the, are there any objections to A? Just do that hum. Don't even ask the opposite question. If you get a few hums, if you get silence, then you're golden. But if you really suspect that maybe there are some people out there who are objecting, who are just being a little shy about it, what you want to do is do things that encourage them to come to the mic. And one of the things that I've seen is if the first question is who wants A and the whole room hums loudly, that actually discourages exactly who you're looking for. So reversing the hum or asking it simply as, does anybody in here, I suspect there are people in here who think this is bull, can you get up and tell me that? Or do the hum that way, I think is fine. And I don't want to object to that, right? I think having that hum to get those people to at least make some noise and then start asking more pointed questions. Why is that? Why are people still having issues? To encourage them might be good.
Jonathan, I mean, one pushback I'd do on the don't ask questions you know the answer to is if you know the answer to it, but you don't know it, it's not clear to everybody in the room knows. Basically, the situation is everybody in the room thinks X, but not everybody in the room knows that everybody else thinks X.
Yes.
And so they all are coming up and vehemently saying X, X, X at the microphone for an hour and a half. You need to let everybody know that everybody agrees with them.
A good clarification. And actually, you know, I generally do that by way of saying, what I'm hearing is X. I don't hear anybody in the room saying not X. Does anybody think not X? I think that's a great way to do it. What I was more pointing to was the idea of asking, does anybody think X? Because then people think it's their responsibility to get up and restate what you already know is going on in the room. So yeah, good clarification. Anything else on that? Cool. Last bit, and I don't know quite what to do about this. So I really hate this idea of calling for consensus. Okay, well, we've had this discussion. Now let's have a call for consensus. Or on the list, it's time for a call for consensus. The whole discussion is meant to achieve consensus. You're supposed to be listening as you go along and building consensus. And it makes it sound to me when people do this like, okay, we've had the discussion, now it's time to vote. And that's not what we're trying to do. I mean, it's good to confirm that everybody's on board with something, and I'm okay with that, but this is more about trying to get people's heads in the right space. I tend to like to, at the end, if there's a question, ask for objections, ask for people who, you know, state what you think the discussion has resulted in and see if people disagree, rather than saying, okay, now it's time for everybody to state their opinion. They should have been stating their opinion all along. Michael?
Michael Richardson. So, it sounds to me like you're discouraging chairs to get closure on an issue by having a consensus.
That's not what I want to do. So
Okay.
yeah, help me here.
What I'm trying to, what I've asked for on consensus, contentious issues are sometimes just, you know, we want to advance the document, okay, but this is not a working group last call. This is we think we got this part right, okay, so I want to have a consensus call on the list to do this. So what you're saying is that I think you're asking for the chair to say on the list, do you have objections to the architecture as blah 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 in section 4?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's right. I think what I want is the formulation of it to be calling it a consensus call, whatever.
I even have that in 2026. We even have that word consensus call, don't we?
I don't think so.
I don't
Or 2418. Someone can check me on it.
Okay.
But I mean, what I want is the confirmation to be clearly a confirmation, and for people not to get the idea that we're relitigating the issue.
Right.
Right.
So that's why we should ask for objections, not plus ones. and I hate the plus ones are useless.
Yeah,
Right?
I think
Okay.
so too. I think so too. Loa?
Hello, Anderson. I think we have the consensus call somewhere in some document. I tend to remember that. It's probably historical now or obsoleted or something. But I think you're using it the wrong way. A consensus call is when I, as a chair, tell the working group what the outcome of the discussion is, and then period.
Right. And it's good. And if it's that formulation, then I think thumbs up. There's too many times where I don't hear that formulation, where I hear the consensus call as, okay, here's the issue. Now there's a consensus call. What do people think? And that one always strikes me as strange. So yeah, I agree with you, Loa. Ben?
So this may be a bit of nitpicking, but when we do the situation where we have a sense of the room and we want to confirm that consensus on the list, and I agree it makes sense, and I'm noticing a pattern. Almost all of the things you're looking for are looking for dissent, not for agreement. But and I like that idea of going to the list and say, here's what we're doing. Does anyone object? However, sometimes it's really hard to tell the difference between I'm not paying attention and I agree.
Right.
So we have been known to say, even if all you want to say is I've read this and I agree, please say it, because at least we want to know that people have read it and agreed. And so these seem a little bit in tension.
Yeah, and this is a good point to add, I think, to the presentation is the problem of silence being as agreement or as nobody's read the thing and you can't tell the difference, I think is probably a failure of the earlier discussion, that we've got to figure out a way to start engaging people and so that they're actually saying things up front and that we have enough support as the discussion's going along. And I don't have a good answer for that.
And I wanted to go on to say, usually when I see us do that, it's in a working group last call, and it might make more sense then than it does when you're just confirming a consensus on a point.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm Ben Campbell. I forgot to say that.
Brian. No, sorry. Yeah.
And
Ben.
I'm Ben Kaduk. So sort of following off on that a little bit, I had some further thoughts or insights about the emphasis on saying, does anyone think X is a bad idea, or well, who supports not X? Because that's sort of getting back into the role of the chair in terms of understanding the consensus and understanding the technical facts. Like, it's sort of the presumption that you as chair understand what's going on and have a sense of things. And so the call here is more of like, did I screw up? It's akin to the appeal process. You, the chair, think you know what's going on, think you understand the best solution, and it's sort of confirming that you didn't miss something.
Right. And that's, exactly going to this second bullet of, as chair, it's more important for you to be expressing, to call the consensus, to say, here is what I'm hearing, here is what I see the consensus as, and allow people to say, nope, you blew it. And we do have a tendency, both as chairs talking to ADs, as working group members talking to chairs, not to want to say you blew it, but that should be okay. We sometimes need to come up with nice ways to say that and not say, you idiot, you screwed up. Some of us like to say those things, but we do need to be able to say, I think you made a mistake here, and get those across. So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Wes.
Okay.
Or Bron jumps in.
Bron Gondwana. Often it's not a choice between this is awful and will destroy the world. It's a choice between X and Y, which are both 90% good, and there's slight differences, and it will be a matter of wearing the working group down to which is better. There'll often still be a lot of people in the room who are like, well, I think Y would be a little bit better, but I can live with X. That's the tricky thing to answer. When this is going to break the world, it's easy to get a real consensus on that.
Is Suresh in the room? For those who don't know the story, and I don't remember the working group, if someone does, you can, Softwires. And I thought this was just brilliant. So it seemed like they had this big contentious thing of multiple choices. And eventually what Suresh did, which I thought was just brilliant, is he said, okay, we're going to do a coin flip. Now, everybody did a little bike shedding on the form of the coin flip and what all the rules were. But actually that was good because it sort of distracted people for a while. And it turned out once they did the coin flip, everybody said, oh, yeah, that's okay. Sometimes it takes the chair cutting the baby in half for the working group to actually decide, oh, yeah, that choice is fine. And so it's a perfectly acceptable mode so long as you as chair and sort of the working group in the back of their mind understand that what's being done is just introducing a forcing function to get the working group to get off its butt. Yeah.
Wes Herdeker, ISI. So I'm looking for advice on determining consensus in difficult situations where, so as you said, sometimes you shouldn't even need to call for a hum because you should already know consensus. The one issue that I have with that, and I've watched it at least twice this week, is that IETF participants tend to be kind of negative and want to tear apart ideas more than they want to admit that they like some elements, or they're willing to fix ideas often doesn't even come up, right? There's rarely an offer to fix stuff. There's an offer to find your holes. And there's often a couple of loud voices. Sometimes they repeat themselves at the microphone. And it becomes very difficult in those situations to determine consensus, especially in things like BOFs where you're sort of like presenting a new idea and you're inviting people to come, tear it to shreds. I've watched that happen at least twice this week that I can think of off the top of my head, and it's probably happened at every IETF and every meeting to a large extent. So what can I do?
Yeah, I like the mode of asking those folks, okay, and as soon as they finished their pitch of why this is just horrible, okay, so this is a showstopper and we simply can't do this, or is this something that needs to be fixed and therefore you're going to give me something to fix it? To push those people. There are, especially if you suspect that the answer is this is something that can be fixed, or it's an objection, but it's not a showstopper, doing that push helps. I can, a very present example in my head where I tried to do something along those lines, and what I got back was, no, it's broken. It's fully showstopper dead. You're wrong, Pete. And at that point, you have to go back to the working group and say, okay, this is presented as a showstopper. Can someone, obviously folks in here don't think it is, can you come up and explain why it's not? What you're looking for, I think, is in the end, assuming you actually have enough information, you want ammunition to be able to say that the person's in the rough if that's what it is. And so, and sometimes I agree it's hard if the person is very strong voiced and everybody else is kind of, I don't want to challenge them. Yeah. Yeah. The other, besides just being a loud voice, sometimes the market dominant force, can sort of dictate the entire phrase, because when they say, I'm not going to implement it, it doesn't matter if two smaller, vendors say, well, I will. And so we run into that issue too. Yeah. And, look, when I describe those cases in 7282, when, the room does really get packed or the important person does say, no, this is wrong. This organization makes bad choices because of those things sometimes, and I'm not sure there's any way perfectly out of it. But if you see it coming, I have absolutely no qualms about helping yourself as chair by, especially on the mailing list. In the room is a trickier business, but on the mailing list, off list, saying, come on, this is bull. Help me out here and say it publicly so that we can at least have a rational discussion. I mean, that sounds sneaky, but what you're in effect doing is encouraging discussion, and I don't think there's any downside to that. I mean, obviously, if you're doing it with your biases, that's bogus, because then you're just trying to support your position. But if you are honest with yourself and doing it as chair, and you know, look, someone out there has an answer to this and they're just not saying it, and I know who those people are, kick their butts into actually participating in the discussion. That's part of your job as chair. Yeah.
Hi, Mohit. I found this very useful. I have a question. Earlier on in your presentation, you mentioned that it is okay to screw up and let people appeal to the AD.
Yes, please.
I especially like that part. Is there a formal appeal process, or should I just say no, contact the ADs?
So 2026 describes something relatively formal. There was one case where I made a decision as chair, and I knew there was going to be one person in particular, I'm not going to name names, who thought that it was just a bogus decision. And, you know, I made the consensus call, and there it was. And I said, look, write it up. I mean, literally write up point by point where I screwed up. And let's get that to the AD and let the call be made. And the act of doing that actually helped, to a certain extent, that person feel better, but also to make sure that we got the right answer. So you can, I mean, the first few steps in 2026 about appeals are pretty informal. Go to the AD and talk to them, but make it as formal or informal as helps your particular situation.
I'll also just add it helps to have these AD office hours, so chairs can provide a little bit of a heads up of what they can expect is coming. So perhaps that's another tool we can use.
You gave up on me, Richard? That was so non-IETF of you to, yeah.
Okay, well, since there's nobody in the queue,
Yeah.
we could wrap this up.
Everybody good? So if you have comments on the presentation, things that you think I should add, please email me, because we do want to build this up and, you know, do a more expansive, and every so often that would be helpful.
My suggestion, Pete, before you run away, about what else we could do is I think it would be useful if we actually either put on a play or something in Sunday morning or something, and maybe involve chairs, one of the audience participation kind of things, where we actually went through the processes that you talked about, okay? Because one of the problems with particularly big scheduling conflicts in this is that some chairs just never actually get to see the interesting stuff like what happened in spring, okay, happen, okay, and experiencing it, okay, I think would help them apply it elsewhere, okay.
I think you might need better actors than me, but okay.
Well, you know, you can direct or executive produce or something, right? You know, but
and actually, I like it in the sense that the other thing we can do is we do have all these Meet Echo recordings.
Yes. So even if all you did was collect a bunch of recordings together into a 15-minute, you know, thing, and with a pause button, like, let's talk about what happened, that would be also useful.
I promise, with permission of those people who are chairing. I swear we won't.
And of course, you could record that part, and then it could become new working group chair training material. Right?
Excellent. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. All right. Thanks all.
All right, thank you, Pete. All right, Greg, are you? I know you were here. There you are. So you all will have seen a couple emails from Greg about gathering feedback on the website, and he is here to talk a little bit more about that. You can drive it.
My name is Greg Wood. I do IETF comms. I work for ISOC, and I want to first of all say thanks to everybody who's already provided feedback. I'm just going to run through a little bit of what we're trying to do here, and maybe get some more feedback. See if this works. No? Excellent. So a couple days ago, I put out a note to the working group chairs list asking for feedback on how people use the IETF website, specifically www.ietf.org. And this is sort of a couple years after we rolled out the new version of the website, which is not so new anymore. And in particular, we're interested in how different people use it. So working group chairs are super important, and have already gotten some really good feedback, so thank you very much. One of the pieces of feedback we got was this drop-down menu in the upper right corner. We could do anything else we wanted to the website, but don't change that, which is great, because as we were developing the site, one of the things we heard was we need quick access to these kinds of things. So it turns out people are using them and finding them valuable. So we're not going to change that for sure. And one of those links on that drop-down menu leads to this page. One of the pieces of feedback we got about this page was it needs refreshing generally, and so that's definitely a task we're going to do. I see people at the queue already, which is great. And can I just do the one last slide I have, and then? Okay, Fred wants to say something right away. So
we're probably going to say the same thing about your typo.
Yeah. So read the top line of IETF 106 live. Now read the next line.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. So people saw the drop-down menu and they were so focused on that they didn't until now read the. No, but thank you very much. We'll fix that. Yeah. So we heard that people are using this page, but it needs to be updated. So that's definitely a task that we're taking on. Wrong way. There we go. But then we also have heard some, I also received some feedback that sometimes the boundary between data tracker and IETF is not always well defined, which actually I take to be good news, is that people can move across these two different sites and use both of them. But it's not exactly clear how to provide feedback in a really easy way so that the right people hear it and things get fixed. So we'll work on that as well. I already talked about how some of the specific pages need to be updated, so we're working on that. And another great piece of input we got, I've seen so far, is that a really useful thing to do would be to consider some typical workflows that working group chairs face, and to understand how well those work, which is also great feedback and something we're definitely going to do. And those are all my slides. I guess I would end with the request to say, if you have other feedback that you haven't seen me summarize here, please make sure to send it to me either by email or just stopping me in the halls. And in particular, if you have some specific workflows that you think ought to be considered, some tasks that you do on a regular basis that either work well or that you run into obstacles in getting done, that kind of specific feedback would be super, super helpful, because then we can optimize for that. And that's my talk.
All right. Did anybody have any additional feedback?
Dave Waltermeyer. So one of the things I've always found helpful in like working out a website or multiple websites is, what is the audience of the site, right? And it seems like we have a very interesting challenge with regards to the IETF website and the data tracker, right? Because the IETF website is intended for people who might be novices for the IETF to find out about what the IETF is all about, and what work we're doing, how we meet, how we interact, and that sort of thing. And then there's the data tracker, which is much more about the business of the IETF, right? And so folks that might be somewhat knowledgeable about how to interact with the IETF would probably go to the data tracker to do their work. I think the challenge is like figuring out how to convert the first group of people into the second group of people, right? And how to bridge the gap between the two websites. Have you put any thought into how to serve those different constituencies? Have you gotten any feedback so far? Is there any way that we can help in helping to, to solve that problem? Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, those are excellent points. It's certainly something that we explicitly considered in terms of defining the audiences when we did the initial website revamp. In addition to asking working group chairs, we're also asking IETF newcomers what they have found useful or helpful or what could be improved. And we're also asking people who don't necessarily work in the IETF or won't work in the IETF, but still need to know that the IETF is important to try and understand how well things work for them. But to your, I guess I would kind of turn to Karen maybe or Rich. I mean, to the question that I take as the most interesting one anyway is how do you convert potential participants or newcomer participants into like regular participants or eventually working group chairs or something like that. That is a question that certainly the website ought to be a part of, but it's not the only that's not where the whole answer lies. Does that?
Yeah.
So we took into account the audiences, definitely the different kinds of audiences, and it's definitely something that we're asking for feedback from those audiences to understand how things work. It's a generally important question that probably extends beyond the website. Does that
I would
answer?
guess a start for that is to try to figure out, for different parts of the site, what are the audience that we're trying to reach, and then working backwards, from there. And it's possible that like different parts of the data tracker will have different audiences. We've talked today about reaching chairs versus reaching general participants. So I think it's important to identify those different user groups and then consider that as far as the workflows are concerned, right? Because it's the workflows that are going to bridge the different constituencies.
I would make a couple observations. First of all, I've heard Greg over the course of the last year or two use the term workflows many, many times when associated with this website. As far as transitioning people, I think there's a package beyond the website of how do people interact with the IETF and what information do they get where and how effective it is. And we are going to try and collect better data on that and get more feedback. I mean, we already try to, we have a newcomers feedback session. And one of the questions we ask them is, did you come to the website? What did you find useful? What did you not find useful? I think doing a more systematic analysis is something that we're hoping to get some help with going
Have you asked the
forward.
question, like, what were you looking for when you came to the website?
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. That, yeah, for sure. That's part of the prompts.
Hi, Roman Danilio. So to add on that thread, I would just like to remind everyone, we went through a spirited discussion on how to do a lot of this thinking we're doing from a empirically driven approach. And the key element of that is doing web analytics on the site. So we have a better sense of who's using it, in what ways they're using it, what's popular, kind of what's not. And from my conversations with Greg, I mean, we see this as a key driver to kind of inform what we do next. And we hope to be able to share that with the community.
All right. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks.
All right. I'm going to switch hats slightly briefly. So the next thing on the agenda was just, I was going to talk very briefly about the status of some edu activities. Well, you're right about the bifocal thing. This one seems worse than some of the others. I know, it's not for the weak of heart. So anyway, there is a whole set of activities around education targeted at newcomers, targeted at working group chairs, and then general technical information. There's also an overarching set of newcomer activities that looks at the education again. It looks at mentoring and outreach. It looks at other ways that the website materials. So there is going to be in the side meeting on Friday, side meeting on side meeting on Friday morning, there's going to be a session on sort of brainstorming about some of the activities that we're doing there, how to get them better organized, how to get more resources, and how to prioritize them. Anybody that's interested in that could come along. And the other thing that I need to post, the Edu mailing list has historically been a closed mailing list, and we have opened it up, but I haven't seen a rush of new people subscribing. So I'm going to post again that this is actually a public mailing list, and anybody that's interested in Edu activities is free to join that. That was all I really wanted to say about Edu activities. I expect that maybe in the March timeframe, if we might come back with a little bit more information about all of the various things that we're doing and where we could specifically use help. But there are a number of opportunities for you all who would like to do additional, would like to help in some of the various areas here. One of the ones in particular I would point out is if there are technical topics that you're interested in, we've sort of left it at this point for folks to volunteer to do technical topics. I know that Stuart Cheshire did an excellent one on service discovery on Sunday. I think there are a number of things that would be useful, but it requires folks from the community to volunteer to do that. And so now it is 1:07, and given the email that I sent recently to the mailing list, I can't dare run over. So you have about 6 minutes for open mic. Is there anything else anybody wants to bring forward? Any suggestions or thoughts? Oh.
So this is something I brought up with Alyssa also. It's not something I think is unique to our working group. I would think other working groups would be impacted. So the situation is we have people from a certain company, and you can guess pretty much where, and they have certain restrictions of interacting with other people in other companies. And we as work group chairs are trying to help them, but I think one of the requirements for them is they have to do this on a public mailing list. The only public mailing list that I can suggest is, use the working group mailing list for all your so-called almost private discussions, just to figure out how to move forward on the document. So what I guess I'm opening up to this group is to ask is if anyone has encountered that situation and if they have any suggestions on how to deal with it.
Alyssa?
Alyssa Cooper. So I think there's a bunch of working groups and author groups that have essentially formed design teams and created design team mailing lists for themselves. Mailing lists are cheap to create, so if anybody needs a mailing list for this purpose, you can contact your responsible AD, and it should be pretty straightforward. I know there's other people who are just collaborating on GitHub, or they're using a Google group or something else which they can make public. But if you need a public forum from the IETF, then we should be able to supply one.
Okay, anything else? All right, if you have any suggestions for future topics, feel free to send them in. And with that, the meeting's adjourned. Be sure to take your lunches with you when you vacate the room.